Hey everyone, I know a lot of you have been asking me to do more videos on train horns for quite a while now, so in this video we're going to do something a little different. Locomotive horn collecting is a rather unique hobby with a small following, but one that nonetheless spreads across the United States and even to some other countries including Canada and Australia. Sometimes, collectors will participate in events known as horn honks, where they bring out horns from their personal collections and put them to air to see how they sound. Some that are really lucky occasionally have the chance to go to horn honks utilizing actual railroad locomotives. I attended two such events that were put on by the Peninsula Railway and Lumbermen's Museum out on the old Simpson Railroad just west of Shelton, Washington in 2019 and 2021. The Simpson Railroad is an interesting enough place that I one day hope to do a separate video just about that railroad, as it was the last logging railroad in the United States. In this video, we're going to take a look at several different horns as they are sounded off on one of the railroad's two SW-type switcher locomotives. I will also explain the history behind each horn and talk about some of the unique features collectors use to identify these horns and determine how old they are. If you want a refresher on some of the horn basics, take a look at my Train Talk episode on train horns. Alright, let's begin. Our first horn is a Nathan M5. The M-series horn is one of the oldest production multi-chime horns, dating back to the late 1940s and offered by Nathan up until the early 2000s. When determining how old M horns are, one thing that collectors will often look for are date stamps. This M5 does not have any, so the only thing visible on the horn that we can use to determine its age is the end of the bells or trumpets. On M horns, the bells and back caps are two separate pieces. Older horns will have a round aluminum base that goes all the way around the bell. Newer horns, such as this, only have aluminum around part of the base of the bell in what most collectors call a scalloped pattern. Since there really aren't any more identifying features on this horn, all we can definitively say is that it was built sometime after the early to mid 1950s. While it is unknown exactly how old this particular horn is, it was last in service on inland Chicago and Eastern GP 40-2, number 4207. Next, we have one of my personal favorites, the Nathan K5LA. The K5LA was developed in 1976 based off of the K5L, but with two of the bells retuned to alter the chord played by the horn. It was developed in partnership with Amtrak to give their trains a more cheery sound and has been their horn of choice on all locomotives ever since. The first production run of the K5LA was in 1977. This horn was built about a decade later, sometime in the mid to late 1980s. One of the identifying features of horns built prior to 1990 is the font of the 30109 part number on the back caps. This is what collectors refer to as wide font. I'll go into more detail on that with the next horn. This K5LA came from Amtrak F40 number 411, and as is common with most Amtrak horns prior to 2007, it has special metal cones, often given the nickname snow cones. These are shop-built and installed devices that were used by Amtrak to keep snow as well as other debris from clogging up the horn. Other railroads had similar cone-shaped debris filters in various different styles. F4411 was originally purchased by Go Transit in the 1970s and was acquired by Amtrak in the 1980s. This horn was likely placed onto the locomotive at that time, as it was sent to Norfolk Southern's Juniata shops to receive work prior to entering Amtrak service. We now move from a K5LA to a K3LA. This is basically just a 3-chime version of the K5LA using bell numbers 1, 2, and 4A. K3LAs have been popular with many freight railroads all over the United States since the mid to late 1980s. This horn came from retired BNSF SD40U number 6311. 6311 was originally built for the Santa Fe Railroad and numbered 5012. Santa Fe engraved this horn on each of the bells with the letters ATSF. Looking at the back caps of the horn, one of them, seen on the left, has the 1980s era wide font 30109 numbering, while the other two have a more squished together print. Many collectors refer to this as narrow font. The narrow font style of back cap font was used on all Nathan K horns from 1989 onward. Assuming all of the bells on this horn are original and none were replaced during the horn's service life, this would likely date the horn to the 1989 to 1990 transition era. Another interesting thing to note is that the paint on this horn is either faded silver or gray in appearance. The 5012 was never painted gray in service, so there is a good chance that this horn was originally mounted on a different locomotive and later moved to the 5012 at some Santa Fe or BNSF maintenance facility. Switching away from K horns for a minute, we are now looking at a Nathan P3. P horns were developed in the 1950s as a cheaper alternative to the M series. This P3 came from Southern Pacific GP20E locomotive 4120. It is what is called an old cast horn. In the 1970s, Nathan altered the casting of the P bells, changing the notes away from the original tuning. The way to tell the difference between old cast and new cast P horns is by looking at the printing on the bell feet. Old cast bells have "Pat Pending," short for patent pending, stamped into the side of the bell foot, while new cast bells have both words abbreviated to just "Pat Penned." Changing tune, next we have a Leslie RS3L. Developed in the 1970s, the Leslie RS series was a revision of the original S-series power chambers. RS power chambers are considerably easier to maintain and can be distinguished from S chambers by the large characteristic spike coming out of the back cap. This RS3L has one of the older, higher manifolds and originally belonged to the Santa Fe. Santa Fe was well known for upgrading their S horns into RS horns by replacing the power chambers, so there is a good chance that this RS3L originally started off life as an S3L. Underneath the Santa Fe yellow paint are two different shades of blue. The RS3L utilizes Leslie bells number 25, 31, and 44. One nice thing about the Leslie bell numbering system is that it is all based off of the frequency of the sound produced by each bell. A 25 bell roughly produces a 250 Hz note, a 31 bell produces a 310 Hz sound, and so on. The 25 bell on this horn is engraved with the letters ATSF. On the back of the manifold there is a Leslie tag covered in several layers of paint. Let's briefly return to K5LAs for a minute. Next up is a K5LA off of retired Amtrak AEM-7 locomotive 904. This is another 1980s era horn with wide font on the back caps. It also lacks an A stamp on the 3A and 4A bells, something that Nathan didn't start doing until the mid-1980s. The horn also has what collectors refer to as a Big Bore 5 bell. In reality, this means that the 5 bell has a wider diameter, the same width as the other bells on the horn. Nathan used to produce big bore 5 bells as a standard, as well as small bore 5 bells that had a narrower throat diameter for use in other countries. In the mid-1980s, Nathan started producing all K5 bells with the smaller width, which is still the standard today. This dates the horn to sometime in the early 1980s. Another interesting thing to note is that even though this is an Amtrak horn, it does not have the Amtrak snow cones installed. The AEM-7 horns never received this modification. Being that this K5LA has a significant amount of wear, layers of paint consistent with the AEM-7 locomotives, and aluminum corrosion, and the fact that the horn dates back to the early 1980s, this was likely the original horn from the 904, although it is always possible that it was swapped at some point with another AEM-7. The next horn we have is a Nathan M3, another in the M horn family. This particular M3 was the one used extensively on the Rio Grande Ski Train F40 locomotives up until 2009. There are no date stamps on the horn, but I have been told that it likely came from a scrapped Rio Grande GP30. Like the M5, the bell bases are all scalloped. Returning once again to K-horns, our next audible warning device is a Nathan K5H from a CSX locomotive. Unlike the two K5LAs we've seen thus far, the K5H has a high manifold rather than the low profile one and uses Canadian or standard tuned 3 and 4 bells instead of the 3A and 4A found on the K5LA. This horn came from a scrapped locomotive, but the locomotive number and type are both unknown. It has the narrow font back caps, meaning it was built sometime after 1989. It also has a serial tag with rounded off corners dating this horn to somewhere from the mid-1990s to the mid-2000s. Some collectors call these round tags. Due to paint covering the tag, the serial number is unreadable, which could help in further narrowing the time period of when this horn was built. Let's take a look at the paint. On most of the bells, CSX YN3 blue from their most recent paint scheme sits atop YN2 gray. On the one bell, there are also traces of orange paint, indicating that this bell could be a replacement. Orange is the color CSX uses on their maintenance of way equipment, so that is likely the origin of the one bell on this K5H. The K5LA hybrid is similar to both the K5LA and the K5H. It uses a Canadian-tuned 3-bell and an American-tuned 4A, which is why these horns are called hybrids. Some hybrid K5 horns utilize the opposite bell combination of American-tuned 3A and Canadian-tuned 4 bells, but those are much less common. This horn itself is quite rare, as it is what is known as a Holden double tag. Holden was a Canadian distributor of a lot of air chime horns up until the mid-1990s, and the horns that came through their distribution center were fitted with 2 serial number and distribution tags. This particular tag indicates that the horn is a K5L, even though it technically is a hybrid horn. The horn has narrow font back caps and a serial number of 18346, dating this horn to the early 1990s. The model train company Rapido Trains Inc. purchased the horn as part of a large supply of used parts from scrapped rail diesel cars, or RDCs for short. It was then sold to a collector. It is believed that the horn came from BC Rail RDC BC-12. Let's go back to P-Series horns for a second. Next we have a Nathan P5. This is another old cast P horn with the Pat Pending lettering. The horn came from the Illinois Central and has various layers of brown and black paint. Note the difference in paint color on the 3 and 5 bells. It is likely that this horn started out life as a P3 and was later converted by the railroad to a P5. The last horn that we will look at in this video is another Amtrak K5LA. While an exact unit number is unknown, it is believed that this horn came from a retired F40PH locomotive. This horn has been fully cleaned up inside and out and is the only one out of all the horns we've seen in this video to have a fresh coat of paint applied. Similar to the K5LA from F40 number 411 seen earlier in this video, this horn has all wide font back caps and Amtrak style conical debris filters. Unlike the horn from 411, the 3A and 4A do not have A stamps. It also has a special patent tag on the manifold. These tags, called big tags by collectors, were used on the manifolds for the first 2 years of production of the K5LA in 1977 and 1978. Assuming most of the bells are original to the horn, this would date the horn to 1978 as it does not use the cork gaskets in between the bell feet and the manifold as was found on the earliest K5LAs. Speaking of original to the horn, the 5 bell on this horn is a small bore 5 like the one on the 411 horn, meaning that particular bell was manufactured no earlier than the mid-1980s. This was likely an Amtrak replacement for the horn's original 5 bell. Before we go, I have one last little surprise. While air whistles were not commonly used on diesel or heavy rail electric locomotives, they were very common at one time on trolleys and interurban electric vehicles. These two trombone-style whistles were manufactured by the company Westinghouse and are typical of the many whistles used on a variety of different interurban cars. The taller one is a 19-inch whistle identical to the ones that were used on the cars of the Pacific Electric Railway. The shorter one is a 13-inch version and similar to whistles used on many different trolley cars in the US and Canada. Put both of these two single-note whistles on one special manifold and the result is quite a unique sound. Well, that's it for this time. Thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed listening to and hearing a little more about the different types of train horns. If you'd like to see more train horn videos in the future, let me know in the comments below. To find out more about the Simpson Timber Railroad and the Peninsula Railway in Lumbermen's Museum, check out simpsonrailroad.org. For more train and railroad related content, subscribe to the channel and click on the Receive All Notifications option. Be sure to check out my other social media pages for even more photos and videos. I'll be back next Friday with an all-new railroading adventure at 9 a.m. Pacific Time right here on the YouTube channel. That's it for now. Until next time, I'm Mike Armstrong. I'll see you down the line. Thanks for watching.